Welcome back, everyone. Today, the eye of Horus is upon us yet again. How are things going in Old Blighty, Horus?
For me, it's okay. It's getting warmer, but politically, not so good. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. Yeah, how are you
For
doing?
sure. Oh, it's going well. Yeah, things are finally getting warmer here as well, and spring weather is in full effect. So it's good to get out, get some sunlight.
It's here. It's just like 5 years ago, the lockdowns began. Pretty much now, but almost exactly 5 years ago, and the weather, just by pure luck, I guess, was amazing. It was like summer in March, and this March it's been like that a little bit again, just the last week. So we're quite lucky, and because obviously no lockdowns this time as well.
Oh yes. Oh, that harkens back to a very dystopian time. Oh, yeah. I mean, like that. I just almost want to put that like down the memory hole because that was just beyond awful.
Bleak, miserable. I hated it.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes, for sure. All right. So yeah, about British politics. So I've been somewhat out of the loop, and gathered this information more through like osmosis, looking at the timeline on X/Twitter, and looks like from a glance, just from my perspective, that Nigel Farage is starting to lose a lot of credibility among people on like the British like nationalist right and just general right sphere. What's going on there?
Yeah, Farage appears to have. Well, his party is Reform, and they won 5 members of parliament in the last election last year, which was a breakthrough. Getting any amount of MPs is a breakthrough. And also the Green Party, the hard left anti-white Green Party, also got several seats, and a bunch of Muslim independents who are solely concerned with Muslim matters also got some independents. So it's a very unusual parliament, this one. But yeah, Reform broke through, and they got, I think, 14% of the vote at the election. They're now polling nearly double that, even after the problems of the last couple of weeks. So well done to them in some ways, but yeah, one of their MPs was a chap called Rupert Lowe, who is in his late 60s, I think. He's independently wealthy. He doesn't take his salary. He used to own a football club. He's known as like a rich guy. He is by far the most sort of hardcore out of the Reform MPs, which is not to say that much, but he was the most encouraging figure in their party and by far in Parliament. And Reform expelled him from they withdrew the whip, which means he no longer sits as a Reform MP. And effectively, I think he's out of the party now. I don't think there's any way he can rejoin. He was the best one. And it was as though what it looks like to anyone to the right of Reform, what it looks like is Farage and the people around him in the leadership getting rid of the most right-wing, the most nationalist MP. Because well, we can speculate about the reasons, but that's what they've done. That's the effect of what they've done.
So there's no like official statement about why he got expelled.
Lowe got expelled. Well, they've changed the reasons. I think the official reason given is he spoke abusively to the party chairman, and that there's allegations that someone who works for Rupert Lowe did something wrong like that, like abusive talk or even like touch someone's farm or something. I can't remember. It's stupid. It's obviously not
it's
the
HR. It's an HR violation. Yeah.
They're managing you out of the business. Yeah, so they came out with that, and they've said other reasons since, implying that it's, there is the real reason is something that they don't want to say. But Raj has said in at least one newspaper interview, and I think a couple of other times he's strongly alluded to this, is that what he really objects to is that Rupert Lowe keeps using this term mass deportation and has edged into even better things. Mass deportations has taken on the meaning here of meaning all illegal immigrants, right? Which is enforcing the law, so it shouldn't be limited to that. But it's taken on this quite limited meaning. Rupert Lowe is just insisting on that, saying that should be an absolute minimum. Of course, they're here illegally. We have the right to deport them. We have the interest. We must deport them, even if that is a large amount of people. And that's a very moderate position, right? That's just enforcing the law. Farage does have a problem with that. But Lowe, to his credit, has said things beyond that. He has said that, say, the people... So it's very inconsistent language, even from Rupert Lowe, let alone the rest of the party. He has implied, though, that people who are just... So, the Muslim rape gang scandal here is just a fire that never goes out now, which is, in a way, a good thing because it must not be forgotten and the crimes haven't stopped. He said that people who've been involved in that kind of crime, that particularly offensive, disgusting kind of crime, should be deported, but also if their families, if their wider communities helped cover it up, which they did, that's why he's saying it, they should also be deported. Now that, unless you go into a lot of, a long disclaimer after you say that, you are perhaps implying that people who were born here should be deported as well. Now, obviously, we nationalists have absolutely no problem with that. And we've done everything we can to encourage, verbally, on Twitter mostly, but we've done a lot to encourage Lowe to say that and go further and go further. And as soon as a new precedent is set by him being the most right-wing MP, we try and push him further and further and encourage him to go further, right? Obviously. And Nigel Farage sees that, and the people around Farage see that, and they find it threatening. They're obviously aware of us. I don't know if they know us by name. I don't know if they would pick me out, but they're aware of us as a thing. And we've become called the very online right. Just apparently that's why our judgment is all over the place because we spend so much time online. It's a bit of an old boomerish accusation. Yeah, there's a guy. There's obviously people around Farage who are constantly telling him this is dangerous, this alienates the public, or worse, Farage and the people around him genuinely are opposed to what Lowe was hinting at, and certainly to what we demand, right? It's hard to tell which is which. But going back before this scandal began, there were already clear signs of this, but Farage was already clearly trying to limit the positions. Right, so, yeah, I don't know when exactly this started, but Farage has made since the election and up until now, Farage has made various statements implying that he doesn't even want to deport all illegals, which I'm sure if you polled the membership of his party, that has been polled on, actually. His party membership is unanimous. I think it was 99% for deporting all illegals, right? Even if that is, 1 million, 2 million people, which it probably is, I think more. Farage is doubtful Farage doesn't want to do even that. He only wants to deport them if they've been convicted of a crime or, certain other things, or if they're Hamas supporters.
That's the most likely that's going to happen.
That's another Sivnat sort of, I don't know what you call that, like cul-de-sac, or Zio Sivnat cul-de-sac, they deport their enemies only,
Yeah.
So Farage has been saying all through the last year, really, things that imply that he doesn't even want to deport all the illegals. And people have mocked him and called him a fake and a phony and a traitor for this, quite rightly. And it's been a standard line among Reform members who are, busy online to defend, who are determined to defend Farage himself, the leader, the party, rather than the cause, that he has to be careful because don't want to alienate the public. Now, I think this is completely wrong. I think the public is way to the right of Farage, let alone the rest of Parliament, right? But nobody polls them on these exact questions. When they do, there was a poll done on whether Reform members want, deportation of all illegals. And as I said, it was 99% in favour. He finds ways of just avoiding acknowledging that or something. It's never put to him, or he just gives a slimy answer, or he just doesn't want to address these questions, right? I think what this comes down to is that Nigel Farage not only is probably constantly being told that the public are to the left, far to the left of where they really are, but also I think he himself is genuinely frightened of the right. He genuinely sees himself as a centrist, and he has no desire and never has had any desire to break from or to break far from the centre ground position on anything except the European Union. But the centre ground was always divided on the European Union anyway, so that wasn't that great. I mean, he does deserve credit for his years of campaigning to get us out of that, but that's the only thing he's ever been a rebel on. On everything else, I think at heart, psychologically, emotionally, and in his beliefs, he's a Tory. He just agrees with the Tories. Maybe the right of the Tories, but that's still far to the left of the public. So I think...
Did you say he's a Thatcherite?
Yeah, and Thatcherites often pride themselves on how non-racist they are. That's just the thing. Yeah, it's embarrassing. It is like Reaganism. It's very, very similar.
Yeah. Yes. There's definitely a parallel there. based on some of the stuff I would listen to on academic agent Nima Parvini's channel, it almost seemed like the media has become like a lot more favorable towards Farage over the last few months. What explains that development? Is it because they understand that he is just a normie conservative Thatcherite, or is there some type of ploy to kind of like prop him up for like the next election cycle?
I expect the influence of us lot, the very online right, as they call us, the nationalists, really. I think they are aware that just more and more people, and I mean quite rapidly, more and more people are just moving over to what they regard as a really frightening far-right position, which is just, obviously, we want our country to exist. We want to have a homeland. We don't want to be despised minority in our own homeland, obviously. More and more people are traveling that direction, and they are breaking, like, as it were, they're like a river breaking its banks. The banks are supposed to be, no, you don't define your nation by the people, you define it by the values and by state ideology and so on. More and more people are just breaking out of that. Like, so mass deportations is just a common phrase all over social media now. And it's not just Twitter, it's boomer Facebook, it's everywhere, right? And people don't necessarily just mean illegals. They mean all sorts. They don't necessarily know who's illegal and who's legal, right? Or they don't necessarily care who was born here or how they got here or whatever. Like, so the sort of the freeness, the free rebelliousness of that, or just the wild uncontrollableness of it, I think that is aggravating and worrying centre ground. So I think to the extent that Farage was being sort of treated with more, I mean, also there's the fact that he's an MP, which just gives you more credibility with the media in this country. They're sort of obliged, I don't know if there's a rule exactly, but they are by convention more obliged to be a bit more decent to someone who's already in Parliament. They're treated with a certain status for being a member of Parliament. So there is that as well. But to the extent that Farage was getting more praise or more succor from the media, like before the last couple of weeks, before this scandal, that was probably because of just, the awareness that our position, which is completely unrepresented in Parliament, is becoming more and more popular and harder to ignore. And it's kind of undermining all the other parties because they're all trying to avoid it. However, in the last couple of weeks, since he attacked Rupert Lowe, obviously that is a new reason for the media to really support Farage. Because Lowe, again, is a potential lightning rod, potential, rallying point for, again, the populist right. Let's call it that. I noticed that Nigel Farage himself, a week or so ago, he made a speech. It was so conventional and so centre ground. It's ridiculous. He made a speech like just saying that people are just levelling racist abuse at his chairman. His chairman is called Mohammed Ziauddin Yusuf, right?
Lord.
And this guy,
totally British. Yeah.
Yeah. He's from, I think he's born in Sri Lanka. He's a Muslim from Sri Lanka or of Sri Lankan ancestry. And he bought the chairmanship of the party last year and shortly before the election, about a month before the election. It's just his weight. It's like for about £200,000, which is not that much money, especially as there's other rich guys around. I mean, Richard Tice, who was leader of Reform, is really rich as well. Rupert Lowe's really rich. So I don't know why that amount of money got him the chairmanship, but it did. And the day that he was made chairman, he did a speech, and there was this cadre of Reform activists just issuing the message to the internet. I watched them at work. That this was like an exciting moment for Reform. This is where Reform, becomes credible or something. And it's just people who will just support any leader, no matter what they believe, right? Just some people are like that. Like some people just they're like the ballast, on a ship. They just swing to the center, no matter what happens. Those people have a great say in Reform, and they sort of speak for Reform. They're just ex-Tories, really, and they just want to recreate another Tory party. Anyway, sorry. Ziauddin Yusuf is the chairman of Reform. He's very unpopular, obviously, among membership, but he has Farage's approval. Farage defended him. He wasn't really under the attack anyway, but Farage started calling everyone racist for attacking him. And then he referred to an article in the Times, which is the state newspaper, basically, not official, but it speaks for the Foreign Office, the Home Office. They clearly just get stories issued out of the civil service, right? Daniel Finkelstein, wrote his column in the Times, just saying, Farage, he's never praised Farage before. But the moment Farage lashes out against the right wing of his own party and against his own membership, Lord Finkelstein swings into action to show his approval. And Farage went out of his way in his public speech to thank Lord Finkelstein for thanking him. So it's like quite, and that was symbolic, right? But everybody else across the centre right and centrist and even centre left media then started praising Farage in a way they've never done before. So yeah, that's escalated in the last couple of weeks in response and in sort of gratitude to him knocking down a figure of the populist right. And it's really quite obvious. It's like an establishment stitch up, but done in the open. They just embrace each other open.
Let's zoom back a bit, especially for people who don't know and the audience that don't know about the history of Nigel Farage. I take it that he initially cut his teeth with the Tories. Am I correct in that?
I think he might have been I assume he was a Tory member until he joined the UK Independence Party.
Yeah.
He joined
That's what he's supposed to know.
Yeah, I think he joined them in the late 90s. I think he was a Tory before that, presumably anyway. And him and all the people around him they seem like Tories, they seem like that sort of people, quite comfortable, privileged lives, very kind of complacent and chortling and chuckling about the state of things when, for us, it's our lives being destroyed. These guys, in last places, they've got plenty of money. They can move abroad if they want. They've got ways out. It's not actually a catastrophe for them. Or they're just, I don't know, or they're just drunk or something. I'm not sure, but he has that kind of, like, he shows a little bit of distress at what for us is literally, like the ruination of our society. He's someone who's remarked on, sometimes he sat on a train and all he heard was foreign voices around him and he didn't like it. Okay, yeah, but that's aesthetic, right? I don't like that either. But try having them as your neighbours. It's not just about what happens on the fucking train every now and then, okay? He always addresses things in a superficial way that implies that he floats above most of it. But as to Farage's history, I would recommend a podcast that Mark Collett did. I assume your listeners will know Mark Collett. It's CLLETT. He was in the British National Party until it fell apart, I guess, in the early 2010s. And he told a really interesting history of this, of how he viewed, because he's been aware of Farage since Farage first appeared, whereas some of us, it took a while to notice it. But Farage really got famous in the sort of 2010s, but Mark takes the history all the way back to about 2000. And he spoke about something that I had forgotten, which was that, so Farage has been, not a Tory member for a long time. But 2004, I think, or 2005, I think Mark said, Robert Kilroy-Silk, who had been a Labour member of Parliament before, he joined UKIP. And he was a genuinely sort of populist figure. I think he's quite, more, I don't know, Farage is a quite wealthy background, but reasonably at least, like upper middle class. I don't know about Robert Kilroy-Silk, but he was quite popular. He had a TV chat show and stuff. And he joined UKIP. And then after not long, he made a comment that alienated Farage. And I think he left UKIP shortly after and formed his own party, and then that didn't work. But the comment that he made was, we need to, basically, to save this country, you have to destroy the Tory party. And Labour were in power, for the big majority this time. But he still identified the Tories as the people you need to defeat if there's to be any sort of patriotic or nationalist or national salvation or just any sort of reversal of the fortunes of the country. You have to get rid of the fake right, the people who stand in the place where there should be a right-wing party, but they're not right-wing. Kilroy-Silk, as I say, from the left originally, had identified that. And so many of us, like me especially, would agree with this now, right? The Tories, whoever's in power, right now, it's still the case, right? We've got a strong Labour government. We still need to smash the Tories. We need to get rid of them. And I mean forever, because they suck up the energy of people who should be patriots. And Kilroy-Silk said this 20 years ago now, and Nigel Farage reacted with horror. Farage is frightened by that, right? There's a similar story, I think, from about 1997 that Academic Agent has told. Tony Blair, on the night that he became Prime Minister for the first time in 97, he was alarmed, you saw the election results coming through the night, so maybe 3 a.m, you realise who's won. He was apparently alarmed at the size of his own victory because he thought that the Tories might be permanently wrecked by it and never come back. And that prospect frightened him. So these guys, they all see each other as part of the same club, the same ruling clique, right? And party matters very little to them. Well, I think we should have the same approach. Yeah, we need to get rid of all of them. Farage is one of them. He is part of their clique. He identifies with them. He probably identifies with Labour, not only the Tories, more than he does with people like me who want to send people back. That's repatriation. He finds people like me frightening or alien or ugly or embarrassing or, whatever, like low status. I don't know. But he does not identify with us whatsoever. And he sees keeping us out of his party as crucial. It's really the most important thing.
So with respect to UKIP, based on what you said, was Farage the founder of UKIP or was he like a co-founder? Did he come into that like slightly later?
No, the founder was a professor called Alan Sked, who is a leftist, which is a strange story. I don't know how that party went to, I don't know much about the party as it went through the 90s or how Farage he didn't become the leader until I think the late 2000s decade. So a long time after, it was at least 10 years after it was founded, I think. But he was prominent. He was just like someone who the media noticed, and he sort of had the look, and had the sort of a certain kind of charisma. It's very superficial, but he does appeal to people on some level. Yeah, he was picked up by the media from about 2000. I think he became the leader a good while after that, 4 or 5 years after or more. But yeah, it started as a party that was left-wing, like left-wing anti-EU, which is a position, but you don't hear much about it. And it was open to the right. And certainly by the 2000s, when I started to hear of it, it was generally thought of as a right-wing party, but leftists were never excluded. And there was a left wing of UKIP, like clearly like sort of social democrat wing of it until about 2016, something like that. Sorry, I forgot what your question was.
So for Farage at that time, it was just mainly all about leaving the EU, I guess, then.
Yeah, presumably almost entirely for GDP reasons or, the ease of doing business or low regulation. That's the right reason. Yeah, not particularly. They never talked about demographics, never.
Okay, interesting. Because I would get the wrong impression that it was like a genuine nationalist.
The media treated it as one, though.
yeah,
including the centre right media, the Tory supporting media also treated it as like a far right threat, or just idiots and cranks. That's the other way of disparaging any sort of challenging movement. Just make them seem wacky and silly and fringe.
I've heard this one take, and I don't know how much you agree with it, but because this is like in light of like what's happened in the last few years, that like Brexit, especially with the information you've provided about UKIP, it seems that it has a kind of like geopolitical dimension to it, where it has like the UK leaving like the general Eurosphere, and instead of like rejecting globalism outright, it tries to like pivot to a more Commonwealth, global Britain with perhaps some American influence in it. Is that like how things have generally unfolded? And was that kind of like by design by some of those people in UKIP?
Yeah, well, Farage himself, yes. The party at large, I would say mostly not. But yeah, Farage himself, he said I think it was around the time of the referendum, 2016, in the sort of time before that, yeah, he did begin to reconceive so his membership, are generally sort of patriotic, weakly nationalist people, sometimes strongly nationalist, with some ethnic component. I mean, implicitly, if they were properly understood. But he himself never mentions race. He mentioned nation. He'll mention culture. And in the year or so before that referendum, he did an interview in one place where he said, would you want Germans living next door or Romanians? He probably means Romani gypsies because a lot of them come from Romania. But yeah, he was talking about nations, right? Obviously, most people would say Germans because the Romanians in this country are just much more inclined to be criminals, right? And just a bit more alien, like Germans are just a bit more like us as well. And that was about as far as he would go, right? So he's setting whites against whites, really. He'll never say, Germans or Somalis or Germans or Pakistanis.
Yeah. Or Pakistanis. Yeah. Yeah.
And then in these, I think in that same year before the referendum, he said things like, I want to, I can't remember how explicit he was, but basically I want to stop immigration from the EU and I want to, if anything, open us more to immigration from the Commonwealth. And again, he doesn't address race. Obviously, that means mostly Black Africans not Indian, but Pakistani, Bangladeshis. India left the Commonwealth, so I don't know if that counts, but we got loads of Indians anyway. But yeah, like 2016, when we won the referendum, up until 2019, when Boris Johnson was elected, and then right at the start of the next year, we did leave the EU formally. What we had voted for was just killed. People like Boris Johnson, like Farage wasn't in Parliament and couldn't really control what happened in that time. So this wasn't exactly his fault. It was the Tories, right? The Tories were in government. It was Theresa May, who was a Remainer, like pro-EU, and on the left of the party. She was prime minister through that whole time until like the very end when Boris Johnson got elected. And then he did pass the deal through Parliament and did get us out of the EU, right? But yeah, in those 3.5 years, that the Tories managed to just transform what was implicitly a nationalist thing. It's rather vague, maybe quite like incoherent, but a nationalist thing in general. We don't want to be part of this super state. They just changed it into the opposite, into a globalist thing. Yeah, and by the time Boris Johnson took over, they were talking about global Britain. That was what was coming out of his government, and what that meant was a Britain that, it's left. The EU was like a small parochial thing. This is what they're saying, right? The EU is like narrows you into just one continent. We want to be open to everything, and that means to trade, but also, as it turned out, that meant to immigration as well. And Boris Johnson got into power.
We're the real globalists.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the left are the real nationalists, they're sort of saying, right? And the EU are the real bigots. I don't know all nonsense. But Boris Johnson got in and basically immediately quadrupled immigration into this country. And he even managed to import a lot of people during the lockdowns when, the pubs were closed, but the borders were open.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Illegal immigration carried on absolutely fine through that, and also just plenty of. It's amazing. But Boris Johnson is possibly the biggest traitor in all of British history, I think. And Farage didn't really seem to have. Right. So here's the role that Farage did have in that. He sort of re-entered politics in I think 2019, when there was going to be a European Union Parliament election, which was spring 2019. Now, Britain was already on to leave the EU. We didn't know exactly when, but we still participated in that election. And it was an opportunity for what was the new party by then, the Brexit party, right? So by this point, this is 2019, Farage has left UKIP behind and was condemning UKIP as like a kind of, I don't know if he called them far right, but he was just saying like they're just associating with ugly people. The reason for that was because UKIP under Gerard Batten, who's like a much more sort of counter-jihad leader, they had brought Tommy Robinson into the party as an advisor and things like this, which was quite strange, right? And Tommy Robinson's not he's not thick, but I don't know why you would want him as an advisor or anything. It was more just a kind of symbol, a signal to Tommy Robinson's supporters, you can support this party now, and that potentially gained UKIP some support. But it alienated anyone like Farage who is just keen to stay friends with the centre crowd. And so Farage was leading this Brexit party. I think he was the leader of it. He was definitely, again, the most famous person in it. And the Brexit party smashed those elections and came first, like easily by far, and got loads of MEPs. Now, that didn't matter to the European Parliament. Obviously, we left shortly after. But what it meant was the Brexit party was an exciting prospect for the next general election in England, in Britain, which, as it turned out, which everyone expected to be later that year, and it was later that year. And the Brexit party had a chance to win a load of MPs. And so for anyone like to the right of the Tories, that's exciting. There's the same sort of people who voted for UKIP. That's an exciting prospect because we want to break up the 2 or 3 party control that we've lived under for like 400 years, 500 years. We're so goddamn sick of, and they're just all traitors, obviously. So the Brexit party was riding high, doing great in the polls. And then during the election campaign, this is now December 2019, Farage sabotaged his own party to help the Tories get as many seats as possible. And he did it, right? So literally just said, we're standing down our candidates in any seat where the Tories are putting up a candidate who supports leaving the European Union, right? Just to help Brexit get done. That was the Tory slogan. So he even adopted basically their slogan and everything. Get Brexit done, get Brexit done, get Brexit done. And that was Boris Johnson. And all it meant was get Brexit off our plate. You know, the ruling class had found it a problem for the previous 10 years by this point. Get this out of our hair. We don't want to deal with this. The people are like, you know, because the people are gaining from it, right? Against the ruling class, right? Because it's one issue where we're actually getting what we want, or our demands are being heard. So they wanted to just get it out of the way, get it done. So Boris Johnson passed this shit deal. But in that election, Nigel Farage betrayed his own party, his own supporters. He told his own candidates to stand down without even talking to them about it. They found out in the news, like people who were standing for the Brexit party, they were like really great activists for the party. Suddenly they're told that they're not standing. That all the work they've done is for nothing. And what they're supposed to do is support the Tories. So this is a disgusting betrayal of his own party. And like everyone should know about that. Anyone who wants an opinion on Farage should know about what he did in 2019. And he helped Boris Johnson get in. Boris Johnson passed a deal to leave the EU, which was crap. Like not really leaving. We're still like living under their rules in loads of ways. And he quadrupled immigration. And he did the lockdowns and loads of other things. He's the worst prime minister we've had. And Farage played a big role in getting him the power that he then used to further destroy our country. He's never shown any remorse for that. And I know I've been talking a long time. I'll add one more thing. Ben Habib, who is a half Pakistani immigrant from Pakistan, but who is a much more genuine British patriot than Farage. Fair play to him. I have to give him a lot of credit. He said that he met Nigel Farage not long after that, I think in 2020. And Farage just very casually said to him, I can't remember what they were talking about, but he said, oh yeah, well, Brexit is done now, right? And this is the guy who was identified with the cause for 10, 20 years, really, of getting us out of the EU. And then he was satisfied with the shit fake deal that Boris Johnson passed. That is a measure of the man. That is how deep his convictions go. It's all about just certain slogans. It's really superficial. So he's also just a shallow, complacent thinker. You know, he's thinking very, very superficial on everything. And I think he just lets himself be persuaded of stuff just on the basis of, very shallow thinking. So it doesn't take much for people around him to influence him and just not really seriously think about anything. So there's also that.
I'm intrigued by what you mentioned with regards to Tommy Robinson, because my impression of Robinson is that he might not be so ideologically distant to Farage, but what prompted Farage to distance himself from the likes of Tommy Robinson?
It never really specifies, but he always makes it, like, this is one tactic of sort of anti-fascists or anti-racists in Britain. I'm sure it's done elsewhere. It's just, they don't necessarily make any argument or statement against you. They just react as though you smell, or like that you're dirty, or that you're like embarrassing to be seen in a conversation with, or to be interacting with in any way. Do you know what I mean? They just they just disassociate themselves from you just by gestures or by facial expressions or like noises or whatever. And he just does that. I don't think he's ever made any statement about what his problem is with Tommy Robinson. I think it's that he sees him as lower class or something. I'm not sure. Like Farage went to private schools and, had a nice upbringing. And I think he's just used to being around people who he finds attractive or, not necessarily good looking, but just upper class or like nice.
Yeah, it's a class thing. That's my suspicion as well. Yeah.
And Tommy Robinson and especially the people around him are like not that at all. They're just vulgar, right? and rough and coarse, Tommy Robinson is not actually an idiot. He's not thick. Like he's quite articulate in some ways. Yeah, he is definitely working class and common and talk to a provincial accent and so on. And so it may just be that. But I think what it is that absurdly, Tommy Robinson is treated as a kind of a threat to the establishment, even though he basically shares their views as well. I mean, he is not even for stopping immigration or anything. He's only for deporting like radical Muslims or, it's all about just radical Muslims or the rape gangs. A lot of us would give, in the same way we would give Farage some credit for what he's done against the EU, Tommy Robinson has shown some courage and has helped highlight the rape gang issue. On the other hand, he's never given any credit to the British National Party, who did so first. And he, when he was the leader of the English Defence League, just often also, like a very dutiful, good guy, just made statements against racists and fascists and everything, and used to boast about when he got in fights with fascists and Nazis and whatever, when he was younger, because Robinson grew up with a multiracial group of friends, like Caribbean guys mostly. So he's always been, he's for multiracial society. He's just against various aspects of Islam, just the fundamentalist Islam. That's it. That's how deep it goes. But as to the question of why Farage rejects him so strongly, he never specifies. But I think it's just the shallow, unconsidered idea that whatever includes Robinson will exclude, well, maybe this is true, but whatever includes Robinson will exclude better people and much larger numbers of people. I think that's how it works.
I see.
You let these guys in, they stink, everyone else leaves, Maybe it's that, but he never says. But one thing I would say is that this issue keeps arising, right? So it arose back then when, about 2017, when Tommy Robinson was an advisor to UKIP under Batten. But it's arisen again recently. People keep demanding, because Tommy Robinson really does have quite a big following. People keep demanding that Tommy Robinson be allowed into reform. I guess he's banned from the party or something. I can't remember. But that he'd be allowed in and basically, I don't know, given some sort of public profile as part of it. I'm not sure what people want from it or what it would achieve. I don't support that. If I was reform, I would keep him out. I would not want Tommy Robinson in my movement. He's a cokehead. He's a fraud, some sort of scammer. Money just flows towards him and disappears. He's a weird. It's not clear what he believes. He's not honest. He hangs around with people like Ezra Levant and all sorts of other dodgy connections who are just also honest, obviously, and who aren't genuinely for Europe or our interests or anything. It's just there's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of reasons to keep Tommy Robinson out, but he never specified. But I would say Tommy Robinson's supporters are fools as well for trying to get him involved in everything, because he's not of any value to a political party. He's not going to become an MP. He's not intellectual in that way or what. He's not stupid, but he's not going to contribute to policy. I don't know why people want reform to embrace him anyway. His energy is all about street demonstrations. So I don't really see anyway, that is why this question keeps arising, not only 8 years ago, but it keeps arising now. And why have you all got a problem with Tommy Robinson? I don't care. But the reform leadership, though, Richard Tice in particular, who was leader before Farage and he's one of the MPs, he just referred very disparagingly to Tommy Robinson's fans as that lot. And it just sounded like a toff. It wasn't particularly insulting, but the way he said it was disdainful,
Oh, yeah. You can tell, yeah.
It just sounds like the upper class guy, just being condescending towards the working class people.
Yeah, that reminds me when I used to do gun lobbying in U.S. politics. There was one more establishment gun lobby that had a chapter. I think it was in Florida, and the executive director is this broad by the name of Marianne Hammer, was caught on a hot mic saying something to the effect "Oh, you better watch out for these guys, those guys in their pickup trucks coming in to one of these meetings, trying to gatekeep and throw shade at a lot of her support base that is largely chuds, working class types." But I've noticed this kind of trend where you do see in these conservative parties, they gatekeep people that do have coherent nationalist packages, but they also go down to levels of gatekeeping where they're going on pure aesthetics, where they might have a guy that's actually 90% in agreement with them, but because you don't hit certain types of aesthetic checkboxes and other forms of taste, you'll just get gatekept, and that's just how elitist these party mechanisms are.
Yeah, and we never really get to find out exactly what the thinking is, but it may just be that. Yeah, they think that whoever they look up to, I don't know who Farage looks up to exactly, but I think he just sort of has a permanent, lifelong crush on the Tory party, and probably all the people around them, the Tory media, and I don't know, just people who run the state as well. I think he just identifies with the powerful, some people do, right? Quite a lot of people do, quite a lot of people just derive their ideas from, they just imitate the powerful or the rich, you know? And I think he's just quite like that. And I'm sure that's just common in all sorts of centre-right movements. It's just like what is it? Like there's a left-wing politician, he's dead now, he's called Tony Benn. And on the documentary I watched, he once said that you get this in the Labour Party as well, that just a lot of the membership just swing towards the centre. Whoever seems the most centrist person, they just vote for them automatically. And it's him who said, it's like the ballast on a ship. And he said, it's like what Mussolini said, you rush to help the victor, right? Not you try and do what's right. You identify who's going to win and then you help them. And, like a sort of a harem of women, you just surround them, sit at their feet. I think Farage has that mentality. He's like, there's somebody he looks up to. I don't know who it is, but just the old ruling class of Britain. And he just wants to be part of them. And it's just that, and I'm not going to be able to do that with guys with lumberjack shirts or camo pants on, like around me. I don't want that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like really superficial, but it's just an old thing of just, I want to be close to the powerful. That's what I want in my life. Whereas like for people who have kind of principles and who care about the future, it's hard to imagine, but it is as narrow and as shallow as that. But one thing I think might clarify it is that just, if we look at things from the point of the ruling class, this could be true of America, I think, as much as Britain. In Britain, obviously, there's kind of older roots, because it's an older country. But in Britain, we have the Norman conquest. So I know this is nearly 1,000 years ago, but there are it's a talking point among some people. I think that it still matters, right? That these the Normans were people who had ideas of just physical dominance. We're just going to take over. We're just going to take over stuff. They were Christians, so they had some restraint. They got rid of slavery, but they had a haughty, condescending view of the country that they conquered and dominated, right? And they just killed a lot of the population to subdue it, to subdue the rest, to terrorize the country. That's how the Normans established their rule in Britain. There's a trace of that still in the British ruling class today. It's just brutal and amoral, I think the same applies in a lot of places. Maybe the sort of Cordillo sort of guys in Central and Southern America as well. Like they were just, they're just the descendants of conquistadors or whatever, or just people who just killed their way to power. They just looked down on everyone they ruled. It's as simple as that.
Speaking of the Norman thing, is it true that people in Britain with more Norman sounding last names tend to be of not only higher socioeconomic strata, but tend to also be disproportionately represented in members of parliament that come from that background?
I would think so still now. I mean, nobody still talks, nobody mentions their Norman, or hardly anybody mentions their Norman ancestry. And they don't, and a lot of them took on English names, or, their names got married out of the line or whatever. So they have English names. But the Duke of Westminster is one guy who famously said he's one of the richest men in the country, and he owns a lot of very prime land, in the centre of London as well as in the country and stuff. And he was asked some years ago, what's your advice for anyone who wants to become as successful as you? And he said, just be descended from a friend of William the Conqueror. And he was joking, right? But it's true. In his case, he just his family has owned that land for 900 years. But Nigel Farage, this is why it's always complicated. He's not of Norman background, obviously. He's of Huguenot descent. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know much about them, but I think they moved in over a period from the 1600s to the 1700s from France. I think they were Catholic. Yeah, were they Catholic? No, maybe not. They're probably Protestant. I can't remember. But they had to have stayed. It's a bit like the Jews, stayed a somewhat distinct group, despite having been here now for, the best part of 300 years. People say there were still distinctly Huguenot shops and little Huguenot areas and Huguenot houses in the East End of London, which was, a major sort of commerce area, until maybe the middle of the 20th century. And in some cases now, Farage is of that background. It may be that he still kind of has an immigrant perspective in the same way that a lot of Jews do. Because of that, even though, he's a sort of 300-year-old pedigree, I suspect he's still a little bit of an outsider mentality as well. The British are a little bit dangerous. They could the British could go crazy and chuck out even the Huguenots. I mean, this is a factor in like the debate over history and immigration in Britain, that almost everybody, well, a great many people think that immigration in Britain went bad in 1997 when Tony Blair got in. And there's this phrase, Tony Blair opened the floodgates, right? Now, there is some truth to that. Certainly immigration went much, much higher, 4 or 5 times higher soon after Blair got in power. So he was like the pre-Boris Johnson, right? Sort of escalating traitors, both of them. But the Muslim rape gangs, for one instance, were already operating long before that. They go back to at least the 1970s. I think there's evidence they go back to the 1940s. I've found some evidence of further back as well. There was a famous or infamous book called The Alien Menace that was written in the 30s. That already, and you can read that online, that already contains lots of accounts of immigrant crimes against British people or immigrants, like benefit fraud or all sorts of stuff, just like scamming the system. That was written in the 30s, right? Or some people say, the Windrush is when it went wrong. My recent writings on Substack over the last year, like aim to prove that no, immigration was bad when immigrants started coming in. It's like certainly including the Jews, right? Who moved in, some had moved in before 1881, but a massive wave of them moved in afterwards. That's what my last essay will be about. And my point with that is not specifically to vilify one group. I'm not saying they're any worse than anyone else. I'm saying it didn't become bad on a certain day. It's like just when the state imports hostile foreign groups, some of them act against us. Quite a lot of them act against us and despise us and see us as just proud. And it's about the difference between groups, which is kind of perennial, if not perennial, but like at least not something you can change by policy, right? So I wonder if the reason that relates to what I said about Farage being a Huguenot is that obviously people like him and Jewish advocates of immigration and sort of anti-nationalism and stuff, they've all got an interest in us truncating our critique to just, like the last few years or the last 20 years. I'm deliberately going against that. And in doing that, I guess, not that Farage knows about me, but people like me are questioning, should we even be deporting the Huguenots? Should we even be deporting the Normans? I don't think you can identify Normans anymore. They're much too blended. But like the Huguenots would be candidates, potentially, because they're distinctness. They have, and so I think there's an element of that. He might still have like a little immigrant consciousness as well.
Are there any parties in the present, because you mentioned the BNP, which is, if I'm not mistaken, defunct. Are there any parties in the present that have emerged that you think could potentially break out that are far to the nationalist right of reform and obviously the Tories?
Yeah, there's the Homeland Party. I was involved with Patriotic Alternative a few years ago, but they have been just like forbidden from the electoral process. They just refused any application to become a party that stands in elections. So that they are not able to run. But Homeland was started by people who broke away from PA. I think it was quite acrimonious, but still a lot of people who support one support the other and don't want a beef between the two. But Homeland is registered and is able to stand candidates. It's still, I'm sure, they're doing very well on social media. They've got like 40,000 followers on Twitter just in not much more than a year. So that's quite good growth. And their memes travel quite far. I've seen their memes posted way beyond Twitter, like boomers posting them on Facebook, which is quite encouraging. And they've got the right sort of manifesto. They are for stopping us becoming a minority. Therefore, it's all written quite carefully and quite sensibly as like proper policy document. So they've got like a full manifesto already. And they are gaining notoriety. I know a lot of the people involved. They're good guys. They are very committed and energetic. So there is that. That will be an option at the next election. How many candidates they're going to stand, how much publicity they're going to be able to get, I don't know. There's still 4 years, probably 4 years till the next election. So much can change. There is also the question of whether Rupert Lowe, because he's still an MP, he's just not a Reform MP, but he has some sort of personal following now. He may start some sort of new party. There's been other figures alienated from Reform who would join him if he did that. and he would get the support of everybody who puts mass deportations at the top of their priority list, as long as they heard of him and his new venture. But if he starts a new party, of course, he's going to be competing for exactly or almost exactly the same people who vote for reform and who are already sort of loyal to them. So that is potentially going to help the Tories if that happens, right? Or it's just going to divide the right, the centre right between three parties or even four. And like you could just see the left win another massive landslide because of first past the post. So, yeah, there's a lot of permutations to be worked out in the next 4 years. And obviously, all the while, they're importing people at a rate of more than 1 million per year, I think.
Yeah.
And all that brings. So we're in a dreadful position, and it owes a lot to Farage. We don't really know to what extent Lowe was responsible for the falling out, but I'm sure he's not perfect. But it sounds like Farage identified him as a threat, you know, a potential rival, but also an ideological rival, because Farage is a centrist who doesn't mind if we become a minority. He has said that. He has been asked that, and he said, I'm not bothered about that. And that is the Tory view. Again, that is the view of Tory MPs. So there is an alternative homeland, and I follow their doings with interest, and I hope they do well. But as it stands, I don't believe they've got almost any money. So far, they are not really a challenger. You do need some money or some other means of getting heard of by millions of people. So, yeah.
From what I can gather, it seems that fragmentation is definitely around the corner, because you mentioned even on the left as well that you had like the radical anti-white Greens gather steam in some Islamist parties. But is that kind of fragmentation more pronounced on the right than the left?
God, yeah, that's a good question. We could do a whole nother podcast on what the Labour Party has been through over the last 10 years, because that's quite an interesting story. Not particularly relevant to nationalists, but it would help answer your question. The left is badly split and unpopular as well, right? So, you know, Keir Starmer got a huge majority, like one of the biggest majorities in history. That was on, I think, the lowest turnout ever, or nearly the lowest turnout ever. And he got a lot fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn got. And Jeremy Corbyn was, and he was seen as like a left-wing extremist, and he was dead set against Israel, like openly, which is unusual in British politics. And Keir Starmer last year, when he won that massive majority, became the most powerful prime minister ever or something. He got fewer votes than Corbyn. So it's not like the left are like popular and they're not united. They're furious. I mean, like obviously millions and millions of people, and I'm talking white leftists here, let alone Pakistanis, are furious about what's going on in Gaza. Obviously, I mean, it's abominable. They are absolutely livid about it. And like Starmer is just on Israel's side, plain and simple.
Yeah.
As is Farage, by the way. And as is Rupert Lowe, unfortunately, as well. But yeah, the left are disunited as well. But I think there's a lot of different routes by which the centre can just regain power from every sort of potential populist force. The centre is good at just drawing people back in. I mean, that's what it is, right? That's what the centre ground is. It's like a whirlpool of political energy, like just sucking in ideology and destroying it. Well, like it's like a black hole. It just grinds things into infinite density, but like also does nothing. It's just destructive. Like they're very good at just killing off every alternative. And you know, when the alternative is led by someone who wants to be drawn back into the centre, that's very easy. I don't see at the moment. I don't see what can be achieved other than by reform being defeated and destroyed. But I also don't want that, because it's so hard to get. It's so hard to get where they've got to. That takes so much. That's so much effort and so much door knocking, leafleting, campaigning of every kind. And there's been thousands of people who've done that work to get reform to that position. Good people, mostly, right? Good instincts, anyway. Maybe not clear in their ideas, but whatever. Like people who basically do value the country. And I don't want to see reform destroyed. But under the current leadership, and apparently there's no way to change the leadership. It's completely controlled by itself, by the leader, by the chairman, the Muslim chairman. reform, I guess, has now become the enemy. I hate to say, we're in a bit of an in-between period. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I don't. I vaguely support Homeland. I mean, like they've got the right policies, but it's not much of a challenger yet. It's not got much fuel. It's not got much energy. It's got a lot of good energy, the people involved, but it's not got money. You do need money. So I don't know what we're supposed to do, what position a nationalist is supposed to take at the moment. I'm not sure.
That's what it seems to be as well, that we are in a state of flux in the West, that you're not just seeing like the typical like populist realignment, but also the political systems are starting to like splinter and break down. I was just reading a book called Geopolitics and Democracy, where they talk about how across many Western governments, these governments are just incapable of like governing now, like passing laws. Like they're passing much less laws, and they're having like governments that can barely form coherent coalitions and all of that now. So we are definitely entering uncharted waters for sure. But I think this is a good spot to end the discussion, Horus. And I noticed you've been quite busy on Substack and also on Occidental Observer with your pieces. Where can my audience keep up with your latest work?
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me talk so much. I've just jabbered on at you for ages, so I hope it makes for a good listen. But and also I just want to give thanks to Kevin McDonald and Ron Unz as well for reposting my articles. Kevin McDonald just very happily sort of praised what I've done since my first article. Really, it's just been nothing but encouragement. So I've got nothing but respect for Kevin McDonald. I mean, what he's crucial. Yeah, just an excellent thinker. I just love his energy as well. He's like he's people try and silence him, and he just doesn't care. He just carries on going, And so I'm on Substack, eternalhorus.substack.com. And thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, no problem, man. You always bring great insights from across the pond. And to my audience, thank you so much for your attention. And with that, El Nino has spoken.